now he's on a hunger strike that's going on to the 20th day or more, protesting the manipulation of the grand jury in a way that's kept him in the United States. Now, I do have to say that the propaganda in the media before his acquittal was huge. Then, when he was acquitted, there was shock. And
silence.
And then silence, and very little mainline media coverage of the manipulation of the system since his acquittal. A few pieces have gotten through. I've written a couple pieces that have gotten some, but it's been very, very quiet. And this is a man who's been acquitted by an American jury.
So there's a pattern to this thing. When it was their hope, some hope of him being indicted or convicted, there was a lot of coverage, and when that happened, it disappeared. What has been your experience with Fahad Hashmi's case?
Well, Fahad Hashmi is a 28-year-old American citizen, grew up in Flushing, Queens, who is accused of providing material support to Al-Qaeda. And when Fahad was arrested, he was arrested in England in 2006 for an event that allegedly occurred 2 years earlier. The allegation is that someone that he knew stayed in his apartment for 2 weeks and kept a suitcase with raincoats, ponchos, and waterproof socks. And then that person who allegedly kept that luggage in Fahad's London apartment took that luggage and gave it to supposedly the number 3 ranking member of Al-Qaeda in South Waziristan, Pakistan. So the charges, in effect, are that by allowing a person to keep a suitcase with waterproof socks in your apartment in England that went to supposedly Al-Qaeda, that's material support to terrorism. Fahad faces 70 years in prison for this, denies the charges, obviously, but it's been, I think, a textbook example of how the media, first off, has branded Fahad a terrorist, despite the fact he's presumed guilty and despite the fact that there's going to be a very, very vigorous defense in this case.
And he's been in prison for 2 years already?
He's been in prison for over 2 years, a year in Belmarsh prison as a Category A prisoner in England, over a year here in the United States, and he's in solitary confinement. 24 hours a day, solitary confinement. Sometimes he gets an hour rec in a cage. Complete ban from interaction with other inmates, complete media ban on him for the most part. And the lawyers, myself and my partner Kerm Wahid, are under what are called special administrative measures along with our client Fahad. So like Lynn Stewart, who some people are familiar with, if we relay information from our client to anyone else improperly, we face prosecution. An interesting thing is also occurring.
I just want to interrupt you for a second. I want people to recognize what you said. So as an attorney, you have limited ability to do certain things. So you yourself are under regulatory authority, as Linda was, and Lynn Stewart was, and she was punished for not following that. So please expand on that so people understand what's going on here.
Yeah, in effect, these special administrative measures put a government eye on the attorneys. And if we relay any information from our client to the outside world, we face prosecution. And it is an amazing example of overreaching by the government to think that a defense lawyer can't express the views of their client. That's what an advocate is. We are the mouthpiece for our client. And that's even more important in a political case, because this is a political case for Fahad. He's being prosecuted because of politics and religion. And so for a client to be stripped of the advocate, whose job is to be their mouthpiece, is a power grab so overwrought that it just truncates our idea of the adversarial system. We believe, and we've filed papers, that's unconstitutional and it's unethical. But at this point, there have been a few judges that have upheld this, and they seem to think that this is the way that our system should be going.
And this is just based on the accusation against your client, not the proof of anything. And by making the accusation, then your right to represent your client, or his right to be represented, is narrowed just by the nature of the charge.
Exactly.
And we must point out for the audience that Lynn Stewart was one of the attorneys, along with Ramsey Clark and others, for Sheikh Umar Abdul Rahman, who was accused of masterminding the terrorist attack on the Twin Tower, the first terror attack. And she herself was indicted for 3 years, I think, finally, and she got some break on that, but that was the whole charge. She held a press conference in which she had apparently conveyed some of the ideas, and that became the source. So it's not only the client, its attorney rights have also been abridged under the present system. Now I need to ask a question of both of you are lawyers. Why are American lawyers not doing something about that?
Well, perhaps they don't have the courage that Pakistani lawyers have. I don't want to do one-upsmanship here, but I have a client also, Mohammed Warsame, who's not known well outside of New York, but he is being charged with material support because he taught English to nurses and because he was physically present somewhere. So his body being present was the material support, and teaching English to nurses was the other material support. And he's been held in solitary confinement for almost 4 years. We recently were able to get him out of solitary confinement, but he's, as near as we can tell, is the longest pretrial detainee in American history. He's been held for 5 years. It'll be at least 6 before there's a trial. The Speedy Trial Act and the Speedy Trial provisions of the Constitution say that if you demand a speedy trial, you're supposed to get one in 70 days. That was more than 1,000 days ago. And the judiciary is playing along with this distortion of the legal system based on these accusations that are purely political, as Sean said. I guess the thing that's important to recognize is what's happening is the U.S. has created legal exceptionalism by setting up Guantanamo. But now what's also happening is domestically, many Guantanamos are being set up in these cases by manipulating the law in particular cases, so people get locked up for indefinite periods of time. The system doesn't work, the laws don't apply, the Constitution means something different, all in the interest of this claim of executive power and this need to protect us from the fears that they've been propagating.
And the media doesn't care, and the academy doesn't watch the media not caring, and we have a situation of despair and chaos, but hopefully that will be the agenda for the civil rights movement in the context of election. We'll continue this discussion after a short break.